Hey there! In this week's edition of The Wrap, we're looking at how, yes, load shedding sucks, but we may be facing a solution to this very crisis. Plus, we give you our final tips ahead of Monday's voting day and tell you all about how Gareth Cliff has had his peri-peri wings clipped. So let's dive into your weekly update of empowering and easy to understand news brought to you by myself, Verashni Pillay, and the Explained Okoza team. First up in our take, opportunity amid South Africa's electricity crisis. South Africans were still reeling from stage 2 load shedding earlier this week when we were clapped with another unwelcome Eskom statement that announced stage 4 load shedding on Wednesday. That really escalated very quickly. This is all happening as our government is preparing to go to Glasgow, Scotland for the 26th Global Climate Talks, which begin on Sunday. Now, if anything should scream, we need to move to green power right now, this ought to be it. Dirty and debt-ridden Eskom cannot keep the lights on. Plus, recent emission statistics show that South Africa is now the 8th largest emitter per capita of greenhouse gases in the world. I mean, that is frightening. But any crisis worth its salt lends itself to real opportunities. The hot topic at COP26 this year is financing for developing countries like ours to transition to green sources of energy while protecting vulnerable jobs and communities that depend on the coal industry. It's a contentious topic that led to the breakdown of talks last year. South Africa, however, is off to a promising start this time. Minister of Forestries, Fisheries and the Environment, Barbara Creecy, announced on Friday that we will receive up to 500 million rand from the Climate Investment Funds. This is a global fund that helps countries reduce their reliance on coal. The exact amount we will be given will depend on the type of investment plan we develop. It's a start, but still a drop in the ocean. Analysts estimate that South Africa needs at least $27 billion. But it's great that people like Creecy are taking the lead alongside Eskom leaders like CEO Andre de Ruyter, who are pro-renewables, rather than dinosaurs like Gwede Mantashe, who is still tied to coal. Even President Cyril Ramaphosa's landmark announcement in June that independent power producers could produce 100 times more of their own power without getting a license shows that things are slowly shifting. It looks like global forces may finally force South Africa to kick its dirty coal addiction and hopefully save us from the unacceptable load shedding we've been exposed to again and again. On to the big story. In just 4 days, you'll be choosing your local government leaders. So, in our final pre-election explainer, we want to talk about coalitions. The last local government elections in 2016 saw shock losses for the ANC in major cities, while opposition parties banded together to keep the ruling party out. The DA coalesced with small parties to retain power in the city of Joburg, Nelson Mandela Bay and Tshwane metros. But we knew it, this whole thing, and things got really messy afterwards. Smaller parties became kingmakers and switched allegiances, while unstable coalitions repeatedly fell apart as ideologically different parties like the EFF and DA could not make it work as political bedfellows. Nelson Mandela Bay saw one mayoral change after another while citizens' needs were sidelined by political infighting, and Tshwane was put under administration. We're far from the mature coalitions that have seen good outcomes for citizens elsewhere. News 24's recent out-of-order index on municipalities found that only one municipality in the top 10 had a coalition government. Recently, the DA showed its hand after a leaked recording from 2019 surfaced, in which Chairperson Helen Zille is heard saying the DA should consolidate its support at 20% and enter into a coalition with the ANC. She quickly backtracked on those remarks this week, but the DA's increasing focus on a conservative, largely white minority in terms of voters shows it's not really serious about governing on its own anymore. So what's your takeaway from all of this? Simply put, your vote matters more than ever. A couple of seats in a council can make or break the strength of a coalition government. Go out and choose a party with a good track record in your city or an independent candidate who you believe in. We're living in an era where your voice and theirs really can make a difference. Onto your briefs. Taking the knee takes a turn for Proteas. This week, South Africa's senior men's cricket team made headlines not for their on-field abilities, but because they had to be forced by the board of governing body Cricket South Africa to take a knee against racism. The gesture, first used by American athlete Colin Kaepernick as a silent protest against the murder by police of a black man, George Floyd, has become a universal anti-racism symbol. Now, some Protea players have knelt before international games, while others have remained standing. This week, the CSA board issued a statement shortly before the team's T20 World Cup tie against the West Indies on Tuesday, saying it was compulsory for players to take the knee. A bombshell followed. Star batsman Quinton de Kock withdrew from the match. He He was widely criticized by commentators and fans, although some celebrated his stance. Today, de Kock issued quite a thoughtful statement in which he explained why he did what he did and that his unhappiness lay not with the gesture itself, but with being blindsided by the directive. As he put it, when you are told what to do with no discussion, I felt like it takes away the meaning. If I was racist, I could easily have taken the knee and lied, which is wrong and does not build a better society. We agree, but de Kock didn't entirely cover himself in glory. Mentioning his family members of color in the statement played into the "some of my best friends are black" trope. Many still didn't understand why he didn't show his support and voice his opposition to the directive. But like all of us, hopefully, de Kock is on a journey. We hope this will spark more discussion, especially given how much has emerged in the past year about the racist treatment of black cricket players, allegedly by people including current men's head coach Mark Boucher. We look forward to seeing de Kock front and centre with other senior teammates pushing for change. On to some international news, more damning Facebook leaks. Facebook is that place where every time you log in, another person's had a baby, you realize you forgot your uncle's birthday again, and your random cousin is still sharing inappropriate memes. It's a weird, wonderful space, but it's also deeply problematic. We told you last month how former Facebook employee turned whistleblower Frances Haugen outed the social media giant for, among other things, prioritizing profit over people's safety. This week, Hogan released more details to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and they are damning. Here are some of the findings. Firstly, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg personally agreed to demands by Vietnam's ruling Communist Party to censor anti-government dissidents if it wanted to avoid being knocked offline in the Asian market. Additionally, Facebook ignored internal complaints about political posts packed with misinformation and conspiracy theories from before and after the U.S.'s 2016 election. Secondly, Facebook's regulation in Middle Eastern and African nations is very thin. It did very little to quell the spread of hateful and violence-inciting content amid Ethiopia's civil war. Hogan said that, quote, the raw version of Facebook roaming wild in most of the world doesn't have any of the things related to online safety and curation that make it kind of palatable in the United States, end quote. And thirdly, people living in the Middle East use Facebook to buy and sell maids or cleaners who were then abused, a human tracking violation flagged by employees that Facebook didn't do much to correct. It also allowed anti-Muslim and hate content about Arabs to spread and even failed to monitor Iraqi militias who shared images of child nudity on the platform. In international news, we salute journalists speaking truth to power. Here at Explained Akosa, we're passionate about news because we know it's under attack in an age of misinformation and failing business models. That's why it's so gratifying that amazing Filipino journalist Maria Ressa and her Russian counterpart Dmitry Muratov won this year's Nobel Peace Prize. It's the first time working journalists have won the award since 1935. The Nobel Committee commended the two for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. In 2012, Ressa co-founded Rappler, a digital investigative journalism outfit that fights misinformation at its source, social media. In a recent podcast interview, Ressa said that Rappler was a way to imagine what technology in journalism would look like if we wanted to use the social media platforms to build communities of action. Ressa is a thorn in the side of the Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte because of her fearless exposés of his regime's violent rule and use of misinformation on, where else, Facebook. She has been served with 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years and has been the target of a vicious social media hate campaign. Journalism at its best can make the world a better, fairer place. We salute Ressa, Muratov, and all the other journalists speaking truth to power against outrageous odds. Thank you for reminding us why we do what we do. In some rather funny news, imagine you're at Gold Reef City's theme park getting onto the Anaconda, a rapid, steep, and thrilling roller coaster. The ride kicks off, then midway, load shedding strikes. You're stuck mid-air, screaming your lungs out because what in the final destination is this? This was the horrifying reality for 35 people stuck at the peak of a roller coaster at Universal Studios Japan in Osaka last week. Some riders were hanging upside down for nearly 2 hours. We shouldn't laugh, but it's pretty funny. It's all due to a power outage, so hey, it's not just a South African thing. Thankfully, no one was injured, and staff were able to lead the riders down a passageway to safety. Fancy a ride on a winding roller coaster? No thanks. I'm going to stick to the teacups going forward, especially with load shedding on the loose. On to some rather serious news on the continent. Sudan and Eswatini citizens are standing up for their rights. Civilians are standing up for democracy in these two African countries and risking life and limb to do so. Pro-democracy protests in our neighbouring country, Eswatini, otherwise known, or formerly known rather as Swaziland, started in June and have escalated over the past 2 weeks. Armed police have used force and authorities temporarily shut down internet services. Protesters, most of them university students and civil servants, want the right to democratically elect a leader, a full transition to democracy and better living conditions. Eswatini, Africa's last absolute monarchy, and has been ruled by King Mswati III, who enjoys obscene luxury while ordinary citizens live in extreme poverty for 35 years. South Africa has sent envoys from the region to engage with the Mswati. Further north in Sudan, the military has seized power and overthrown the uneasy transitional government it was part of with civilian leaders. This interim government was supposed to help the country transition more fully towards democracy with an election in 2023, but these hopes are now imperiled. Sudan's people are not taking it lying down. We're seeing a repeat of scenes in 2019 that led to the downfall of the country's brutal leader, Omar al-Bashir. The North African nation has also resorted to shutting down the internet, a dirty and desperate trick of authoritarian despots everywhere. 10 people have reportedly been killed, with several others injured. The US, UK, African Union and others are in discussion with Sudanese authorities. Back to some local news. We've been telling you for some time how former President Jacob Zuma has tried to delay his decades-old arms deal trial. His most recent tactic was to argue that the lead prosecutor is biased. Now remember, this whole court thing is separate from the drama around Zuma being released on medical parole recently after he was imprisoned for basically standing up the State Capture Commission. Now back to this matter, Judge Piet Koen on Tuesday has dismissed Zuma's whole special plea to have prosecutor Billy Downer accused. So now Zuma will have to stand trial for the infamous deal with French arms manufacturer Thales, which dates back to the 1990s. Now, Koen's decision was a good one and would have meant that the trial could finally start, which would have now taken place in April 2022 in the KwaZulu-Natal High Court. But it doesn't take a genius to predict what happened next. Zuma intends to take the ruling on appeal in Bloemfontein Supreme Court of Appeal, a move straight from the Stalingrad handbook that will only delay justice some more. The back and forth is exhausting, but we're cautiously optimistic Zuma will get the day in court he claims to want, in this lifetime maybe. On to some other news in South Africa. Gareth Cliff's Peri Peri wings have been clipped. Fast food giant Nando's has pulled its sponsorship of Gareth Cliff's podcast after years of Cliff falling foul of the line between freedom of speech and just plain being an ass. Cliff, well known for controversial statements, outdid himself last Thursday by shouting down a black woman's experience of racism. The fracas occurred on Cliff's podcast, The Burning Platform. He was in conversation with DA leader John Steenhuisen and one South Africa member, Madzuli Rakhivanti, about the upcoming elections, independent candidates, and racial issues in South Africa. The ish hit the fan when the controversial Phoenix DA posters came up. Rakhivanti said the posters were deeply racist and spoke to her experiences of structural racism. Cliff promptly dismissed those experiences as anecdotal and unimportant to all of us. He and Steenhuisen insisted that service delivery, not race, was all that matters in an election. It's startling that a whole opposition party leader doesn't realize how much race matters to voters, whether he agrees with them or not. It doesn't just show up his and Cliff's lack of empathy, it questions their competence as public figures if they can't grasp something so basic about the citizens they're speaking to. Video footage showing Steenhuisen smirking as he yelled service delivery over Rakhivanti's attempts to speak were particularly troubling. Nando's put out a rather mild haha statement hours later, saying it takes the right to freedom of speech very seriously and would be reviewing the content. It later pulled its sponsorship of the show, citing the fact that Cliff spoke over Rakhivanti and shut her down as its reason. We were expecting more, peri-peri in its response, but it was the right thing to do. Freedom of speech is important, but so is recognizing South Africa's painful past and how it continues to play out in very real ways for black South Africans. Into our last story, South Africa's news eclipses Hollywood's best efforts. Between claims of government tracking Tembisa's most famous babies to John Wick stalking the streets of Mamelodi, some of the news got us laughing this week. The Tembisa 10 story is back in the headlines. Independent newspaper has doubled down on its bizarre tale of a woman they claimed broke the world record by giving birth to 10 babies. Its reputation was thoroughly muddied after no proof was found to support the claims, but the media group's owner, controversial businessman Iqbal Survey, and journalist Pitram Pedi have now spun an even wilder tale involving a shady Nigerian doctor in cahoots with government officials. This is the same government that can't keep the lights on. Yeah, sure. In a nearly 3-hour press briefing, Survey left us with more questions than answers, but stay tuned, folks. He's promised to deliver those answers through a 10-part series a la Netflix. Meanwhile, further north, John Wick strode into Mamelodi. No, guys, not Keanu Reeves in his famous action role, but a vigilante murderer targeting members of the so-called Boko Haram gang that terrorizes people in Mamelodi, particularly foreign shop owners, extracting a protection fee of 300 rand. This is unrelated to the Nigerian Boko Haram, by the way. Now, look, we don't condone vigilante behavior, but South Africa's reaction had us chuckling. Some asked this John Wick to visit their communities, while others told America to stop filming the latest John Wick movie. After all, we've already seen it. That's it from us at The Wrap, an award-winning product of Explain.coza. Simple news summaries for busy people. Remember to share the love, tell your friends to sign up for the updates at explain.coza/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from the team.